Now we should have the mic.
Yep.
All right. Oh, I better turn my volume down too. All these little steps here. Okay. Well, good morning. And I don't have a pen, but I don't need one. Wow. So welcome back to another WCN Live here in the Wilson County News Break Room. We're looking forward to our conversation today here. My name is Kristen Weaver. I am Director of Operations, and I'm joined by
Brandy Hawkins, Customer Service Representative.
and
Melinda Creech, Independent Scholar.
thank you for being here, Melinda. We want to thank our sponsor. Thank you very much to The Price Way, which includes both dealerships, Price Chrysler Dodge Ram and Jeep, and Richardson Brothers Chevrolet here in Floresville. Both of these dealerships are located on 181, and they just offer a slew of all makes and models, as well as you can shop for cars. You can also use their service department, which is amazing, and really have to check them out. Also, you can shop careers. So the Price Way, we thank you for being our sponsor for many sponsorships of WCN Live. Thank you so much, and share some love with them. Next is we have a comment contest, and we are going to draw a winner. So with each live conversation, we ask that you post some comments, and thank you to those who are telling us good morning. Good morning back to you. Post a comment in there, and we also welcome your questions as the conversation goes on, but that comment's going to get you into the drawing next week. So right now, we'd like Melinda to do us the honors and draw us a winner.
Feel free to read it.
It's Elisa Arnett Sirens.
Okay, you can give that to Brandy, and Brandy will be reaching out to Elisa. I didn't read the name again.
Yeah, Elisa Arnett Sirens.
Great.
If it can be mispronounced, I will do it.
Right. Well, we probably all did. Sorry, but thank you so much for watching and for commenting, and congratulations on winning a C Street gift shop gift bag that we will have for you here from the Wilson County News Office. Good morning, good morning. So today's conversation is going to be very interesting. I'm very excited about Melinda telling her so many stories. History is just a fascinating subject, especially when it's local. We have titled it Freedom Colonies Along the Cibolo Creek. Melinda, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and where you're from.
Okay. I'm from Houston. I grew up in Houston, was raised there. And then my husband was a pastor down in Clear Lake for 25 years. And then he got called to Baylor University to teach at Truett Seminary and was there for another 12 years. And what led me down that path was while he was teaching at seminary, I went back to school. And so at the age of 64, I got a PhD in English literature.
Okay.
And then because I liked to go into school so much, I got a degree in museum studies in the next 2 years after that. And so that's kind of what has brought me here.
Well, you sound like you are quite a resource, and I know that you are with your connection to so many of the local organizations here. But first, tell us a little bit about what you have is the Creech Prairie Restoration.
Right. So after my husband retired from teaching at Truett Seminary, we moved here to Floresville. Mm-hmm. In 2007, his grandmother, Lily Creech, who some of you might remember, her husband, Irvin Creech, was a mail carrier down in Falls City for 40 years or something. So we inherited her place out on County Road 401, just not too far down the road there. And we had been coming back and forth since 2007, and then when he retired, we moved here full-time. And it's 88 acres, and we had it in cultivation with a local farmer growing, hay and wheat and things. And we wanted to do something more hands-on that we could be involved in, and we weren't going to be farmers. So so we just happened to find out about a grant called Pastures for Upland Birds.
Okay.
And in this grant, the Texas Parks and Wildlife allowed us to have $10,000 worth of seeds for tall grasses and native plants and wildflowers, and the use of a no-till seed drill. Wow. And so in 2019, we planted the 88 acres in native grasses and wildflowers and the mantra is that the first year they go deep, the second year they creep, the third year they leap.
Wow.
And so by the third year we had 6 foot high
Oh,
switchgrass and
Mhm.
Indian grass, and it was just beautiful.
Wow.
And it did increase the habitat for wild turkeys, which we see, and quail.
Fantastic.
Just a couple of days ago, we had 16 quail that just went by our back door
Mhm.
and disappeared into the prairie.
Oh, how
So
beautiful.
we've been on a steep learning curve
Mhm.
about learning
I
about
bet.
the importance of prairies
Mhm.
and the wildlife that surround us. So
Wow.
it's been a great thing to be involved in learning our neighbors that live in the prairie and the grasses and the things that grow there. So
Wow.
it's been a lot of fun.
Very interesting. And some of the help you had as far as guiding you, that was, do you want to mention some of the organizations who led you there?
Don Kirchhoff
Mhm.
down the road here in Fall City, he was kind of our mentor
Wonderful.
and helped us to get started. He's about 10 years further down the road than we
Mhm.
are.
Yeah.
And it's just been a wonderful experience.
Mhm.
And then we last year we incorporated into a nonprofit called
Great.
Creech Prairie Restoration
Mhm.
with the mission of restoring people, plants, and wildlife.
Great.
And we've built a barn dominium kind of thing on the property so that we can have groups there, and also we have 3 motel rooms that people can stay. So the Beer Audubon Society comes out and does bird bio blitzes 3 or 4 times a year, and the Native Prairie Association has been out for things, and the Texas Wildlife Association is actually bringing a couple of schools from San Antonio this spring
Great.
to walk through the prairie, and we've had other classes about prairie education,
Good,
about the
good.
importance.
Out of curiosity, are y'all members of the Wilson County Wildlife Management Association?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
great. I'd like to give them a plug because that sort of was, we're members, and I think that is a good organization to start with, if anywhere. I know that they also lead to so many resources for property owners with land and what
Right,
to
and
do.
we work closely with the wildlife biologists here
Right.
in Wilson County, and also
bet
the
you'd have
Native
to.
Prairie Association of Texas
Right.
and the San Antonio Native Prairie Association.
Yeah,
too.
there's just so many resources. Well, that's fascinating. And then through all of those things, all of it is connected because you're also a volunteer and supporter for several local organizations that, and again, I know it's all connected in a strange way, but you tell the story and it's like you can just see it coming together. So tell us about those organizations.
Yeah, so we're real involved in the Wilson County Historical Society, and we did a presentation just not too long ago about the history of the prairie in our area. So this whole area used to be kind of there was a tallgrass prairie that came all the way from Canada down to Floresville. This was where the end of it was. And it was an oak savanna, mostly tall grasses, just dotted with a few live oak trees and some post oak trees and riparian forest along the creek beds. But that's all gone now, just about. But that's why we're restoring that a little bit.
Right.
But we're involved with the Wilson County Historical Society. I'm a member of the Wilson County Historical Commission. I'm also on the board of the Sutherland Springs Historical Museum. And as I mentioned before, we're connected to the Beer Audubon Society, Native Plant Society of Texas, the Texas Wildlife Association, and then we have our own nonprofit, the Creech Prairie Restoration. We're also involved with, right next door to us, in property that used to belong to Robert's grandmother, which had been sold along the way. It's now owned by a philanthropist from San Antonio, and the San Antonio Mennonite Church is leasing that property. And there's a nonprofit there called Sparrow's Way, and their mission is to support vulnerable individuals and families in healing and resilience. And so they're working with that little wooded area that's next to our property too.
Interesting.
And then, of course, I'm also involved with the Poly Mansion. I'm good friends with Robin and Keith Mashalik.
Very cool. And there
Because I didn't get into that. I
lot
wrote
of
my
these
master's
a lot of
thesis.
these people in these organizations are overlapping, like you just mentioned. So, and they all do such wonderful things and for the community. So that is now going to lead us into the topic today. So tell us about, how did you come to focus on this work with the Freedom Colonies in the area?
Okay, as I mentioned before, I went on and got a master's degree in museum studies. I had been working at the Armstrong Browning Library at Waco at that time and was really interested in working as an archive and manuscript specialist. And so I did my master's thesis on the Polly Whitehall Mansion, which is in Sutherland Springs. It's the only existing stone plantation house in Texas. Wow. And it's just beautiful. Yeah. If you've not been able to get over there to see it, you should, when they have an open house, should go. But there was tons of information about that house because the family had all the records, all the receipts and letters and all photostatically copied in the 1930s and put into the University of Texas's archive. Wow. We don't know where the letters are now, but we do have those copies. Okay. And so we have tons of information about the house. For example, we know that in 1854, the house was built in 1847 to 1850, but in 1854, the family bought a piano from New York. His relatives lived in New York, so all the windows and doors and all of the furnishings were all bought in New York City and shipped here. So they bought this 700-pound piano. We know, we have a receipt for it. We know the name of the ship captain, the ship that it was shipped on, the company that received it down in Indianola. We know the name of the 3 ox cart drivers that carted it up to the Polly house. And so we know the whole story about that piano. And it's now with a family member in California. So we even have current pictures of the piano. So we know so many things about the Polly mansion. But after I did all this research about Polly House, I began to think, this was a slave plantation. Were there slaves in Wilson County? This is something I'd never heard.
And then you just...
In 1860, there were 1,000 slaves in Wilson County, and 1,800 in Guadalupe County. And so I thought, this is a story that needs to be told. So I began to research.
That's really fascinating. That's exciting to hear a story unfold like that, one that we haven't don't have so many finite details like you mentioned. So
I have
describe that a little more.
I have four kind of projects that are going on now. One has to do with the Polly Mansion. Next weekend on the 4th of February, we're going to be hosting a new exhibit that I've created at the Sutherland Springs Historical Museum. And I brought a little kind of the first one of the boards from it.
Okay.
And what it is so I have identified the names of all of the slaves that the Pollys, all the enslaved people that the Pollys had at their mansion. Wow. And found on most of them a little bit of the story of their lives through census records and slave schedules and some family correspondence and some books that were written by the families and some newspaper articles. So I've managed to piece together a little bit of their stories. And I've made these quilt squares for each one of them, because there's, of course, no photographs of these people. But this is Theodore Henderson, who Mr. Polly bought for $2,000 in 1865. He was owned by Finley Henderson, Mr. Polly's son-in-law, and he went off to the Civil War and was killed.
This is a picture of, this represents...
And this represents Theodore because he was a blacksmith, and that quilt square is called an anvil. And so I've made similar ones for all 28 people that were associated with Mr. Polly as enslaved people. So that's one thing that's going on.
Very cool.
That happens next Saturday at the Sutherland Springs Historical Museum. Then the second thing is that some local historians from the past, Maureen Lyles and Shirley Grammer, did some amazing work on identifying the fact that there is a black cemetery behind the H-E-B store, and formerly enslaved people are buried in that cemetery. And I kind of took up the charge with that, and so have been working with some local historians and deed records to try to find out things about that. And so we have just gotten a grant from HEB, a $20,000 grant,
Wow.
to get a fence built around the cemetery and some signage for the cemetery.
Quick plug for Floresville HEB. We just had Richard, the unit director, on WCN Live last Wednesday, so you can find that episode and give it a watch. It was a really good one, and we talked about this a little bit, but very cool to know that, because this it's tied to the cemetery, because that was the
Because
colony.
that was the Freedom Colony here in Floresville. So a little bit later on, they moved from the Cibolo Valley, some of the formerly enslaved people, to Floresville, and particularly the Walker family, the Edwards family, bought land there and started a Freedom Colony. There were 3 churches, a school, the Dunbar School, and this cemetery.
Yeah.
And so we're working on a historic cemetery designation for the cemetery, and I've just submitted an application for an undertold story marker for the Floresville Freedom Colony.
So where would that would have been, you're saying, that whole area behind HEB?
Well, the
or
HEB
whole-
property was owned by Mr. Walker.
Okay.
And then the Edwards owned some more property, and there was other people that owned the
Yeah.
other property there.
Wow.
But just behind the HEB, and then all that property that's in front of the HEB there was owned. It was his farm.
Did it have a name at the time?
It was just called the Colony,
The
and all
Colony.
the records
Yeah.
that are in the county courthouse. It's just called the Colony.
Yeah. Cool. That's really nice. And so that is that's your other project.
Right,
And
and
that
I
leads.
didn't. This is all kind
Yeah.
of connected too, because my husband's great grandfather was the first sheriff to live in the jailhouse, and he lived a block away next door to Nancy Edwards. So he lived
wow.
close to the colony.
Yeah.
And then the lot that is the HEB water retention lot was owned by my husband's, the other side of his family, his mother's side of the family, B.F. Rosser.
Okay.
He owned that property.
And you
So
said,
there's also kind of a family.
who was the
connection.
sheriff again? Your
Richard Robert Creech was
Oh.
his name.
Okay.
And my
Nice.
husband has the same
Yeah.
name.
Yeah. Very cool. Wow. And so then that's the third project, right? 2, 3,
Right.
or
So
1,
the Walker Edwards, the exhibit, and then we're working on this. Of course, I know a lot of the details from census records and things, but I don't have very many personal stories.
The narratives.
And so on February the 17th, the Haven Oaks Community Bible Church is hosting an event for us called African American Story Gathering Day. And the Lavernia Historical Association, the Sutherland Springs Historical Museum, and the Stockdale Museum, which are all along the Cibolo Creek,
Right.
are collaborating on this event. And we hope to get a lot of people maybe that can come and share stories that they remember about their ancestors that lived in these freedom colonies along the Cibolo
Right.
Creek.
Right. Let me show the flyer up close.
Ray Warren is the pastor of that church, and his ancestors are actually buried in the Walker Edwards Cemetery too. So lots of connections.
Now, and then the people listed here.
Yes, and these images that
interesting.
are on the poster are from the in the Library of Congress. It was a WPA project in the 1930s where they interviewed former enslaved people. And these 3 men actually lived in this area.
Oh, neat.
Albert Todd lived
Yeah.
in Sutherland Springs, and Felix Haywood and Reverend Bill Green lived up just on the other side of Lavernia,
Okay.
as when they were enslaved people. So
Wow, that's great. And you had brought some of your resources
right,
with
so
you.
these are some of the resources, some of the local resources that I've been able to use. This is called African Americans in Wilson County, 1860 to 1885, and it was put together by Jamie Lou Walker Harris, whose ancestors are also buried in the Walker Edwards Cemetery, and it's a great resource. This one is called Slave Transactions of Guadalupe County, and it's written by Mark Gretchen, who's our beekeeper friend, and he was formerly involved in the libraries in Guadalupe County. It's a great book.
Great.
And then the Lavernia Historical Association has just published this one, the Lavernia Family Legacies. And there are several stories in here about formerly enslaved people that lived around the Lavernia area too. So
And that actually gives you some of the narratives, is what you're talking
it does.
about. That you're looking,
some
and you're
stories
wanting
about
more.
one of the men, Walter Wash, taught Mr. Gaith, who owned property, who actually owned the Polly Mansion at one time.
Oh, okay.
He taught him how to play ragtime piano, and so that story is in here.
Oh, that's cool. And so we should give a shout out to the Lavernia Historical Association. It is their newest book. It's out, and they have special days, like they're actually there today, where you can pick up a copy of this book. And if you want to learn more information about that, directly probably on Facebook, look up the Lavernia Historical Association on Facebook and probably get you the most direct info on that.
And then
Very
the last project,
Yes.
in addition to the cemetery and the exhibit that's going up and the
Gathering
story
Day.
gathering
Okay.
day. So I'm beginning writing a book called Stitched Together,
Yeah.
Freedom Colony Families Along the Cibolo. And so all of this information is going into this book that tells about these just resilient people who endured slavery and then came out of it and bonded together in communities to help each other.
Right.
And many of them, gained their literacy and went off to college.
Right.
And one of the stories about one of the Polly's enslaved people, Teresa McLeod Moore, she went on to marry a man, and they eventually moved to Austin, and he was a custodian at maybe the University of Texas. I don't have that nailed down yet, and a carpenter. And their son was educated as a physician in the first black college for doctors in Nashville. And he ended up coming back and being a doctor in San Antonio.
Wow.
So
And
some of the stories are quite
stories.
successful.
Oh, very cool. I just had a thought, and it left. Well.
So that's the book stitched together, and I'm using kind of a quilt motif for that too, because
pretty.
they're just little pieces of these stories, because the enslaved people were not literate. Almost all of them were not literate, and
That's
they
what I was gonna
didn't
say.
have the ability to retain these stories in a written manner, like at the
Right.
Polly House, where you have all those records from them. But they just passed down stories, from one another. And so I have little bits and pieces, so it's kind of like putting together a patchwork quilt of what it was like in these freedom colonies along the Cibolo Creek.
That's going to be a great book.
Well, we'll
Oh my
see.
gosh, I can't wait then.
There's an awful lot of research that's already gone into it. So
My thought was, in our conversation before we came on live, you had talked about that the colonies formed, and then they formed schools, and you know how many schools were at the Freedom Colony, and probably all of them, but how many were there here in the Floresville Colony?
We can define pretty substantially that there were at least 14 freedom colonies. They were all focused primarily around a church and a cemetery.
Yeah.
And then we've discovered that through your records here, actually through the newspaper, I got to go over there and research one day. There were at least 34 black schools in Wilson County, all private, before from 1860 to 1940 when the schools all consolidated.
Yeah.
And so each one of those little schools grew up around one of the colonies.
Yeah.
One of them that I've just found out about was a man named Burl Montgomery, who was one of Mr. Polly's slaves.
Okay.
And there's a deed record in the county clerk's office that's it's so nice because he says, I've started this, he donates his land for a school, and he says it's because of my love and desire for the education of my race. And so he starts the Montgomery Colony. And all we have left of that now is the Walker Montgomery Cemetery out on County Road 41. So we don't have any buildings left from that I know of. Now it could be that there's some out there that I don't know about. But
Wow. It's
so that's
fascinating.
one of the and many of these students, once they got their education, some went to historically black universities here in the area, the Guadalupe College in Seguin or St. Philip's College in San Antonio, and got their further education.
Very cool.
And, you know,
Neat.
lots of stories.
Oh man, it sounds like it. I really hope that you get people to come and share their stories with you on February 17th. Is that a Saturday?
It's a Saturday.
Saturday, February 17th. And that's at the Haven Oaks Community Bible Church when they're having the African American Story Gathering Day. And just hope that you continue to be able to tell your stories and build that book that you're writing and keep this all alive. Is there anything else? Brandy, do you want to maybe go through the comments and see?
We did have a couple comments, lots of good mornings. Norma Lejas Hinojosa says, as a little girl in 1978, I lived right down the road from the Poly Mansion. Today I'm 64 years old and have not toured the home. It is on my bucket list. I still remain fascinated with that home and its history. And Ruby Follick said, so fascinating, wow. Michael Anthony loved history. Ruby Follick again, so many projects, awesome. Ben Reed, love it. And then good morning from Linda Downs and fascinating from Nanette Kilby-Smith.
Yeah.
And that, I know history is important.
Yeah.
If you don't learn from it, then
You're going to repeat it.
You're going to repeat it.
Right.
And even though this is not, the history of this may not be something we want to consider, but it did happen. And then
it made the people resilient.
And perseverance of everyone to get through.
It's our story.
Forward.
It is. It sure is.
It's our story.
Yeah. So.
Very cool.
And I might mention another thing that kind of provoked all this too is about it's my husband and my 50th wedding anniversary this year. We're in our 49th year, and on May the 31st we will be married 50 years. And he's a pastor and a teacher, and so we were reflecting about that and remembered that in the Old Testament, the year of Jubilee, the 50th year, they did three things. They let the land lay fallow that year. They freed all their slaves, and they forgave all their debts. And so we decided at the beginning of our 49th year that we would try to practice those three things.
Neat.
And so we have continued with our project of restoring the prairie, letting the land lie fallow and return back to the way that it used to be. And then my research with the slaves is my effort to free at least their stories from being unremembered and undertold. And then we've just been practicing generosity, trying to this year. So those are our ways to celebrate our Jubilee year.
Well, this has been truly delightful to meet you and learn all that you're involved in. It's just been wonderful. I can't believe the resource that you've been to our area and what you're doing. So, we're storytellers as well here at the newspaper. So, it just all kind of like runs together. So can't wait to be sharing some of what you're doing in the Wilson County News, and just really happy for this conversation today.
And if you want to keep up with the things that are going on, I think the Lavernia Historical Association Facebook page would be a place to look, and the Sutherland Springs Museum Facebook page, and the Wilson County Historical Society's Facebook page. And then you can go to our website. It's just creechprairierestoration.org and see things there. And then I've started a blog. It's called Stitched Together Notebook.
Okay.
And I'm hopefully I'll be writing during this process of putting together the book. I've posted some things already on that one, but it's Stitched Together Notebook is where it is.
.com?
.com. Yeah, well, .blogspot.com.
Okay.
But I think you could just
maybe
Google
search it?
Stitched Together Notebooks.
Very cool. That sounds very interesting. We should all go check that out. So many resources. Where to go first? Yes, but we thank you all for joining us today. This has been a really good conversation. I hope you learned a lot from this, and that brings you to some information maybe you weren't aware of, and that we can all follow along and learn some more about our history of the area, and a great way to remember these people from the past. And we want to thank our sponsor, The Price Way, which includes Price, Chrysler, Dodge, Ram, and Jeep, and the Richardson Brothers Chevrolet dealerships here in Floresville. They're both located on 181, and they offer an array of makes and models, all makes and models, as well as a huge service department, and you can shop careers there as well. So thank you so much, The Price Way, for being our WCN Live sponsor for many weeks. And thank you all for joining us today, for your comments and sharing the love. Share this video, and also come and join us next Wednesday when we'll be here again for another WCN Live. So that's it for now, and
Sure.
Thank you.
we'll see you later.